And we're off.
Perfect. Guys, first of all, from me, thank you very much for joining. It's great to see 22 on it. That's a huge turnout. I think that's probably our biggest one. I don't know how many we had last time, but the whole goal of this is basically just to give you guys a little bit more info and give you a chance to kind of ask a couple of questions and basically just anything that you want to know about, I suppose, the upcoming years of your child and what to expect. This is a good chance to kind of ask your questions. Can you switch to the next slide, please, Mike?
I can, Jamie. I can also give you. Oh, there we go.
There you go. Perfect. So, very simple agenda. I will not keep everybody very long. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to go first for about 15 minutes. I'm just going to go through like a couple of keys that I've found and probably what I suppose from my side, what I would consider the most important or kind of cornerstones to college recruiting. Keep it very, very simple and basic. Then Mike is going to give us, we'll use inverted commas, 15 minutes. Mike Smith. And he'll go into some of the more detailed stuff. So any big questions, save them up for the end, because then Mike Bolt is going to go through a quick Q&A. So he'll kind of take a couple of your questions if you want to leave them in the chat as we go along. And he can organize them and kind of direct them, whether it be towards me or towards Mike Smith. To give you a little bit of background on me and Mike, I can't even remember how long ago it was now, probably 5 years ago-ish, 5-6 years ago. I had a player come to me and I basically had no idea about what to do with them as far as college golf goes. I was absolutely terrified to give them the wrong information. And as I started to dig into this information, I realized that the whole subject around college golf was effectively a minefield that I did not have the skills to tackle. So I'd looked into a few people and came across a lovely girl called Brandy Jackson. Reached out to her for a little bit of help, and then more specifically wanted her to take on a client who was a boy. And unfortunately, she didn't deal with boys. But luckily, she sent me Mike's way. And pretty much since that, we've had a pretty good relationship, some pretty good successes. And to be honest, Mike's been an absolute huge help to help me understand the whole subject of college golf and kind of recruiting and education. And you'll pick up a lot of nuggets from tonight. And I've definitely picked up quite a bit over the last few years. Can we go next slide?
Appreciate it, Jamie. And just to interject really quickly, anyone that's just coming on, if you want to leave your email, your recruiting class, or when you're going to graduate, and what type of school you're at, or the specific school you're at in the UAE, that would be super helpful for us to direct the conversation a little bit better today.
For me here, this is kind of a very basic outline of what I would consider the 4 steps of getting to a scholarship. And I think the process of getting a scholarship is actually a very simple one. I don't really think there's much to it, and I think it can be very overcomplicated at times. For anybody who's been at our school, you'll see on the wall actually a few of the students over the last few years who have managed to gain scholarships. It's something we as a team are extremely proud of, and very proud of the kids who have essentially taken this process and just stuck to it. And to be honest, I think that's the biggest thing. Is a lot of people know this. I would say almost everybody knows that this is the process, but it's actually the ones who really stick to this and understand the importance of each step that really end up kind of getting the scholarship, and especially the better ones at the end of the day. I think the kind of first step there, achieve a high standard of golf. I think, again, there is absolutely no way around this one. This is, if this isn't done, I would say it's impossible to get a genuine good scholarship in a high level D1 university. You have to have a good level of golf to play college golf. And I think testament to that is the amount of players that are coming out now. So the likes of Colin Morikawa, Matt Wolff, and you see guys like David, I'm going to say his surname wrong here, Mike, you can correct me, David Puig? Is that it right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yes. So he's obviously, I think he was in his 2nd or 3rd year in college, and he's just signed with the Live Tour now. So he's going to be turning pro very soon as well. So you see basically tour players in a box coming out of university now, whereas it used to take them a number of years to kind of get comfortable. they're essentially coming out now and just able to win on the PGA Tour. I think the second one is probably the one that the kids least enjoy, which is actually achieve a decent level of academics. It does not need to be an exceptionally high one, but there is a minimum required. I think the third step is to realize that essentially this is a marketing campaign, which we'll go into a bit more now in a second. And last but not least is the interview. The person behind the camera or facing you is key. Can we go next slide? Right, so standards. Mike corrected me a little bit on this one with the females in Division 2 and 3, so I'll let him amend them. But roughly speaking, let's say, these are kind of the scores that you really have to be shooting to get into these divisions, especially the higher ones. So, looking for some of the higher scholarships, the likes of a Florida and Oklahoma State, you're definitely going to be needing to regularly shoot 70, 71 as an average around here. Going into some of the lower level D1s, 74. For girls, it's always a little bit higher. So generally speaking, you can see kind of add a couple of shots onto each division. Now there is wiggle room in all of this, and the thing that I find is that, with these standards, it's very much based on not only a scoring average, but also specific events. They're looking to see what you do in bigger events, especially. And if you have the opportunity to play in the United States, that gives them even more of a kind of reference, because not only will they see your scores, but they'll also have references that they're aware of. They may see people who've won other tournaments that they're aware of and maybe looking into, and they can kind of benchmark you against them, which is a really good thing for them to see.
And they can come see you play.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That gentleman right there on the right is the man himself, David Puig, who has just signed on the Live Tour. I believe he's second year university, right? He's just finished second year, or just going into third year?
Yeah, I think he might be going into third year.
Third year, yeah.
That's the hardest part of my job, Jamie, is remembering, as I get older, remembering where everybody is year to year, especially with COVID and everything that happened in the last 2 years.
Yes. So he is an absolute baller in the States. He was way up there in the rankings he would have been way up there in the rankings for the PGA University in his third year.
Yeah.
Had he continued it, but he's obviously taken a very lucrative contract and gone over to play for Live. But again, it just shows the kind of standard that these guys are playing to. So he is definitely one to benchmark against. Going into
quite interesting next, too, because he's an Arizona State guy, and so is John Rahm, and they're both Spaniards. So quite interesting that he made that decision, in my opinion.
Especially with the rumor going around this week about John Rahm, but we won't say that.
Yeah, true.
So yeah, like I say, there's no real way around the standards that's required for playing each division. Like, the scores have to be shot, and shot regularly. This is not a one-off. And I think it's fitting that kids have to shoot these scores, because realistically, even if you overhit in this part of the world, you manage to fake them and you get into a university and things like that, eventually you're going to get found out very, very quickly. And nobody wants to be in that scenario where you go over there and you're just not prepared for it. So number one is definitely be able to shoot the scores.
And if I can interject really quickly, Jamie, sorry to interrupt. If I can interject, all of these divisions are typically on different timelines as well. Every school really is on a different timeline, but some of these top end Division I programs, they're recruiting guys as soon as they pass the initial contact date, which is June 15th, after your sophomore year. Or in British curriculum, that would be it's 13 years, so that would be the summer after year 11. Whereas within Division III, that might not be these numbers. You don't have to shoot until year 13. So there's a big timing component too to this. It's not just what numbers can you shoot, it's also when can you shoot them. The guys that are showing success earlier are typically those, top 50 schools, standard recruit. But you can there's some great Division III programs out there, and that's one thing I'll preach later on when I get the chance. I'm going to take some of your time here really quickly. But I'll preach later on how many great opportunities there are at the Division II and Division III level. And a lot of times these are schools that no one's really heard about because they're not on ESPN and they're not bumper sticker schools, but they're great opportunities for young people.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I learned from you was obviously a lot of the divisions are not really based around just the level of golf, but also the amount of money that school brings in. So like a lot of top
Yep.
D1 colleges tend to be football colleges or basketball colleges because they bring in so much money, and that's part of the reason they're afforded that title of Division One. And I think, we've had a couple of go to Division Two colleges, and to be honest, it's actually suited them better because they get into, there's certain things that they were looking for in a college, and Division Two just suited it better than Division One did.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Right, so going on to the education bit, this is as I said, the bit that the kids least enjoy. I think a couple of things, again, keeping it brief, a couple of things to be super careful of. Choose the right subjects. This is especially important, I would say, with British curriculum. As we found out, and we were very lucky to find out at the right moment in time, I think the rule is anything with the word studies in it doesn't apply as a subject in the States. Was that it?
For the most part, yeah.
For the most part.
There's approved subjects and there's subjects that are denied. And, essentially, the NCAA goes through each and every prospective student athlete's eligibility. And what it is you pretty much just apply on their website with your transcripts, your grades, your SAT scores, your ACT scores, and an amateurism questionnaire. But a lot of times they look for certain core subjects. And if you've taken the wrong subject, and a lot of times in GCSEs or A levels or even BTECs in some cases, if you take one wrong class, either you'll be forced to retake that class, or if you're too late in the game, you might just be ineligible for your freshman year. So it is super important to choose the right subject. Very important.
Yeah. There is a minimum you have to get. Now, to be fair, the NCAA minimum is quite low, I would say.
2.5 for Division One and 2.2 for Division Two. It's quite low. You won't get into most schools with that.
Yeah, that would average what, C's?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, sorry, GPA over here. Yeah, pretty much a B or C average. That's your below average student most times in the States.
So like that's the NCAA minimum. But the one thing I would say is that, like I said, they're better than most. It can only help. The higher you get academically, it doesn't just make things comfortable for you getting in the school, but it actually opens up other opportunities for scholarship money. So I think everybody thinks that, when we get golf scholarships, that everything's covered. But to be honest, 99% of the scholarships are actually only part scholarships. So you might get 30, 40, 50, 60% scholarship, and you still got to pay the remaining 30, 40, or 50%. But one of the things that a lot of schools offer to better academic students, they'll do something called stacking, where they can actually stack a little bit of academic or a lot of academic on top if they feel that you need it. And again, it just offers that little bit more opportunity for you to go to some of the better, more expensive colleges. If you can get a very high GPA or some very good grades, and you say to them, look, we need, maybe a little more help, they'll go, well, let me speak to my academic department. And funnily enough, there's actually a lot more academic scholarship money available than there is athletic. So I would say that definitely having better grades can only help you. And I think this came into play with one of my students who was looking at a scholarship, and their coach actually insists on very good grades. And it's not because he wants them to be smart or the school is super academic, but he was just very insistent that better people made better athletes. So the people he wanted on a team were those who would stick to their guns, knuckle down, and get the work done when it needed to be done. I think this is an important one, getting your name out there right away. And this is one of my favorite pictures ever. It's three of the boys basically playing the Faldo series a few years ago. And for those who don't know these are three best friends and remain best friends. And two of whom have joined top D1 schools this year. So Toby on the left has gone to University of Florida, and then Josh will be going to Tennessee, I think, in January. And Arjun is a year behind them in school, but they have remained very, very good friends to this day. For me, getting your name out there is really important. And I think there's a number of ways of doing it, and you've got to do it the right way. I think there's a lot of wrong ways to do it. Emailing coaches is definitely a good start. The thing to remember is you're not always going to get a reply, especially depending on your year, but it doesn't hurt to get your name out there. Word of warning to all you parents. Parents, please do not email coaches. Make your child do it. Number one, it's good experience for them. And number two, the coaches hate getting emails off parents with a passion. I would say have lots of conversations. So once you are allowed to speak to coaches, don't be afraid to reach out and call them and talk to them and try and chat to them, because even if it's just practice chats with schools that you really have no intention on going to, it's great to get the ball rolling and get used to being in that kind of environment where you're speaking to a coach and get used to the answers. And I would actually recommend that you start with the colleges you don't want, because at least you get better at that kind of interview process. Have a centralized website. I would definitely have just a very basic web page with your scores and some of your swings on it, and just regularly update it. It makes it much easier for coaches over here, especially, to view your scores, because the EGF doesn't have any database. It doesn't have any regular updates as far as scoring goes. So I would definitely say have a small basic website with your scores and some regular golf swings on it for coaches to see. Instagram, something we had to push one of our students into, Mike. Worked out pretty well in the end. I would say Instagram, honestly. Don't feel like you've got to post fake things. Just keep it simple. You know, a couple of swings here and there, a couple of tournament results if you have them. These are always good. And then obviously shoot scores. If you get your name out there from shooting scores, you're going to get some notoriety. So it kind of all comes back to that, really. If you can't shoot the scores, you're probably not going to get the scholarship in the end. All right, patient but prepared. Know what you're looking for in a university. This is really important. I would say not everybody's looking for the same thing. And I think everybody's attracted to the top golf D1 schools, but not everybody wants to go into the same environment. Not everybody wants to go into a Shark Tank, and not everybody wants a big university. Some people want academic, some people don't. Some people want a really good golf team that they may have to struggle to get on. Some people want a team that they're going to walk onto straight away. Some people want good weather. Some people don't mind being in the cold for a couple of months. So really figuring out what type of university you're looking for is key. And I think that's important for happiness along the way, because it's a big, scary step. And at the end of the day, if you're going somewhere for 4 years, we really want you to enjoy the experience. As I said before, like, the interview is very key. So practice it often, practice it with different people, friends, mentors, parents. Just think of any questions that you're going to get asked and try and practice that interview, because to be honest, that's the final step. That's going to be the make or break moment where a coach gives you or takes away a scholarship. And know a bit about the university. Don't go into it blind, because they will ask you. And if you can show that you've got a real kind of taste for that university, the chances of you getting into that are going to be definitely higher. And ask good questions. Don't be afraid to ask things when you're on the call. I think there's nothing worse than a call running out of things to say. They want to feel like you're engaged in it, and they want to know, you know, what kind of fears you have. They want to know what you're looking forward to, and don't be afraid to ask things about that. And I think if you do those things, you're probably going to deliver a very good interview, and you're probably going to have that coach very much on your side and give you something to remember. Last photo, Matt Fitzpatrick, a very good win at the US Open this year. And this was him actually winning the US Amateur back in the day. And again, it just shows how many good players have come out. His brother is a very good player too, Alex. So he's coming out of Wake Forest now, am I correct? Did I know that one?
I believe he's at Florida Atlantic.
No, I'll put money with you on that one. It's definitely not going to pay you.
You might be right. I'm thinking of another Alex, I think. Yeah, no,
but
right.
Again, another great player coming out of the college system, and you know, you'll see Alex in the next couple of years probably on European or PGA Tour with some big successes. And it does just go to show the value of that golf scholarship. It really can help you develop as a player and develop as a person. And I always find if you've found the right college, not necessarily the best golf college, but if you find the right college, you will definitely have a better chance of success in life. And it's definitely something I would recommend to all. Over to you, Mike.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. That was great. Let me pull up the other presentation here. All right, that covered a lot of points. That was great, Jamie. I think what I'd like to do now, 15 minutes, you guys hold me to that. We're going to talk about some more detailed numbers in college sports altogether, what college costs, and then we're going to break down college golf a little bit. We'll talk about scholarships, and then I'm going to get into just a few other things. Jamie hit most of those points in terms of what to do during recruitment, but maybe I can just go into a little bit more specifics of how we actually make that happen in the recruiting process. And
I was trying to cut down your presentation, man.
Yeah, you did a great job, and I think I can keep this to 15 minutes now.
By the way, if
Otherwise, we'd be
anybody
here
has
for
any
hours.
questions, if anyone has any questions, stick them in the chat box, and we'll get Mike to dish them out to me and Mike on the tail end of this. So feel free, if anything comes up along the way, just pop it in there, and we can go through some of those questions.
So nobody likes talking about money up front, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. What is the cost of college? A lot of these public 4-year in-state colleges, so your normal, federally funded, in a lot of cases, colleges are about $25,000 a year. Your public out of state, so a lot of you internationals will be coming out of state unless there's a tuition waiver. Like at University of Central Florida, they have it's called a linkage scholarship. Doesn't matter where you come from, you can get in-state scholarships. So it's always good to ask these questions. It's always good to have someone that's more knowledgeable on this, that knows where these scholarships are coming from and how the school breaks them down. But that's also something that's quite complicated to know across the board. And then your private 4-year schools are quite significantly more expensive. Your average tuition is $34,000. The grand total per year is about $50,000. But what I tell families is this is the sticker price. This is not your net price. When Jamie's talking about merit aid or academic aid and the idea of stacking athletic money with academic money and potentially even some other scholarships as well, it quite often knocks down that price from $50,000. So just for example, I had Claude called me about, I think it was middle of May, and said, Mike, I got a girl for you. And she was one of the best players in Massachusetts, and she just committed to Georgetown. A lot of you know Georgetown. That's a bigger name school, especially in the States, and mainly because they're academics. But if you look at Georgetown's sticker price, it's about $82,000. Turns out I won't release how much she got athletically, but it wasn't a whole lot. And she got about 30 or 35 grand just academically. So, knocking off quite a significant chunk of that. And then she stacked that with athletic money. And we're still searching for a few more scholarships that might be applicable to her. So don't let the private school sticker price scare you guys away, especially at the Division III level with some of those smaller schools. A lot of times you're not actually paying, even without scholarship, just academic scholarship, much less than what you see. Okay. And we'll just kind of sift through here. This is a demographic of where the schools are actually located and the size of the schools. I think it's just some interesting data here is, a lot of your Division I programs actually aren't that large of schools. They're 3,000 to 9,000. And I guess that's all relative depending on how you deem large or big school. But I think, when we have this idea of football stadiums, packed house at University of Florida, the Swamp rocking every Saturday night, we think of 50, 60, 70, sometimes even 80,000 people in that stadium. But the stats are that you have about half of the schools that are larger than 10,000, but I would say it's only about 10 or 15% that are bigger than 30 or 35,000. Right? Your Ohio States, your Texases, your Georgias. There's only so many schools that actually are really that big. I think the biggest schools in the country are Michigan State and, surprisingly, University of Central Florida. But UCF, as we call it, is actually a commuter school, so it actually doesn't feel as big as it is. I think right now there's over 55,000 students enrolled there. And I just checked the stats, I think about 10 or 15% online as well. So you don't really feel all those students, but still quite a busy place to be. And most of your Division I colleges are in the city. But as you see, in Division II and Division III, there's a lot of options here. It's not just one type of school in one area. And I think a lot of people think that Division II schools are, in this rural area. It's really not a big number. Most of them are in suburban towns or in big cities. I think this is a good way to show it. Just exactly what we were just talking about there. Division I definitely has average schools that are bigger. But if you look at the student body, right, because the schools are so small at Division III, typically between 2 and 4,000, you're going to have a lot more student athletes around. And sometimes that culture, that community, that environment is better for someone making the journey, across the pond or across the world, or just someone that's more comfortable in that environment academically, perhaps from right down the street. It just depends on what you're looking for and who you are. And what I do here at ForeCollegeGolf is we have a college preferences worksheet, and then we talk through that. Where do you want to be? What type of weather do you like? Big school, small school? What sort of major are you looking for? What curriculum? There's a lot of ways you can narrow down the process, but it's quite a I think at this point I feel like it's easy, but it is quite a painstaking process if you don't know what you want. You really have to go research it, ask good questions like Jamie said, and start to figure out what the best fit might be for you. All right, let's talk college golf specifically. So I'm going to throw a couple numbers at you guys pretty quickly, so buckle up. But Division I teams on the men's side, these are just the men's numbers. I have the women's numbers as well, but I won't flash them up in front of you guys this evening. Division I has about 300 teams. Division III actually has more. So there's no athletic scholarships at Division III, and a lot of these schools are private. But if you want a more student athlete focused, smaller environment, more intimate, more niche environment, Division III is really where you would find it. And there's actually more opportunity there than there is at Division I. So a lot of people don't know that. And altogether each year, there's about 3,000 recruits per class. So there's over 12,000 college golfers. So I think those numbers that Jamie showed you about shooting certain scores, they're very, very good. Here's my chart. So this is actually a little bit more on the timing of things, because at the Division I level, especially the elite level, we're talking really the top 20 schools here. The Power 5 level, that's about the top 60 schools. And then this number is for grade 10, or for you guys, that would be year 11. By the end of that year, if you want to play Division I golf at all, even at a smaller or mid-major school, you better be shooting about 74 by the time you finish year 11, or grade 10 for us in the States. Okay, and then by the time you finish, that's not as low as some people think, but by the time you finish 12th grade, you're going to get about a shot and a half better on average. So these are averages using what we call here in America junior golf scoreboard, and this is data that's been compiled over the last 8 years that I've taken, and it's based on an average golf course length of about 6,800 yards and a course rating of 72. So pretty standard. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, so I always talk about thresholds because people pose questions a lot. They say, what does it take to play in Division I? It takes a 74.4 average most times. Yes, there's a few exceptions to that. There's definitely some outliers that come in much higher than that, especially if they're playing bigger events on harder golf courses or things like that. But for the most part, that's the threshold of playing Division I golf at all. And then, you see some of your more elite players, they're actually averaging, 3, sometimes even 4, not under par, but under the course rating. So if the course rating 74, the 10th ranked player is typically shooting and averaging 70, and that's in tournament competition. That's pretty strong. And then on the bottom end here, even there's a lot of recruits in the top 1,000 of their class that are going to do great Division II schools and pretty amazing and impressive Division III schools as well. And they might not average, 76.5 to 77 until their senior year. So for those of you that are in your year 12 or year 13, and you think, all hope is lost and you don't have time, that's not true. That's probably true at the Division I level because you're too late to the game, and recruiting happens before that most times. It happens right after grade 11 summer for you guys. But even in year 12 and early in year 13, there's still plenty of opportunity for you guys out there. Okay, so here's the demographics. This is just a cool, colorful map here of the states and kind of the regions and where the fans are more than anything.
You realize your photo, by the way, that is, you made that, right?
I did, way long time ago.
That shows up almost #1 on Google Images if you put in college golf.
I've noticed.
It's
I
very
was
high.
yeah, I just had some fun back in the day, and I threw that
It's
up
very
and
good.
added it to the website, and it was helpful back. I went to James Madison, which isn't on this chart because we're a smaller Division I mid-major, but we're right here in the kind of Virginia territory. And I figured I have another one where I actually added the JMU logo, funny enough, but it's just important to understand kind of where these coaches recruit. These are all Division I schools, so they have very high budgets. They jump on planes, they come to Dubai, they come to Germany. I mean, they're not coming to the UAE very often. I don't know if any coaches actually have been there, but there's coaches all the time going to Europe, South America, Mexico, Canada, places to actually recruit players. But this is where their general regions are for each and every program. And that's not all, 300 Division I programs. That's probably, if I were to guess, that's probably 80 or 90 of them. All right, geographically, this is where the Division I programs are. Let's go look at Division II programs. This is kind of interesting. So if you guys look at the scatter plot there, the chart, that's Division I. I'm going to flip to Division II here in just a second. I'm sorry, guys. Zoom was in my way. This is Division II. I apologize. So Division II, primarily in the southeast of the United States, a few sprinkled in the northeast, but I would strongly say that these are the stronger programs. Sorry, down here in the southeast, and a few of these in the west here, or in the Midwest, I should say, and then a lot of these stronger programs out here in California. But if you look at Division III, there's a stark difference here. Higher academic, smaller schools, but also a high percentage of student athletes at the school, but they're primarily situated in the Northeast. And as you can see, there's a lot of states like Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. This is interesting. Florida and South Carolina do not have Division III programs. So, when you're looking at a school list for you guys, make sure you're being realistic with where you're at, also understanding what you're looking for in your college preferences, and understand geographically where these schools actually lie. Because, I've had plenty of families come to me and say, I want to find a Division III school in Florida, or I want to find a Division III school in the Southeast. They're slim pickings here. I mean, we're talking about 6 or 7 schools. And if you're late to the game, these coaches could potentially already be done recruiting. So that would be an endless pursuit. That would be wasting your time and spinning your wheels, in my opinion. All right, let's talk scholarships really quickly. Jamie, to your point, I think just generally speaking, I think the easiest thing that I can help you guys understand is that, golf is not a head count sport. Head count sports are sports where you're either on a full ride or you're a walk-on. So full scholarship or no scholarship. And those are sports like football, baseball, basketball, and in women's sports, tennis, volleyball, certain sports like that. In golf, we are called an equivalency sport. And what that actually means, I have a slide for it here. What that means is how, and Jamie mentioned this a little bit earlier, but they can break down scholarships however they want. They can give you 100%, they can give you 99%, they can give you 1%, however they want to do it. And scholarships are 1-year deals. So just a word of advice, but if you have a coach tell you, we're full, we have no scholarship left for your freshman year, that doesn't necessarily mean that means no. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't play for that team. It also doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be on a great scholarship for year 2, year 3, and year 4. So that's something that you have to understand, and then you have to verbalize and talk through with the coach. Another good, I think this is really important to understand. You might look at a private school that costs 55, 60, sometimes in the case of like Georgetown and a lot of the Ivy League schools, you're talking upwards of $75,000, $80,000 sticker price per year. A lot of these schools are more expensive for almost everybody compared to a smaller state school or a school where you're going to get in-state tuition, because it just starts off, there's a stark difference, right? 50,000 versus 15,000 in this example. But at the end of the day, you really want to calculate, okay, what is the scholarship of both? What's the final net cost that my family will have to pay? And in this example, the difference is only about $12,000 a year, where you start with a difference of about $35,000, as you can see, 50 versus 15, but the actual difference ends up being only about $12,000 or less. So it's important to understand these things, and it's important to understand these calculations. And most coaches, if you're willing to sit down and have the conversation, most coaches are willing to have it with you. They should be, at least. Room and board, so just a dorm room, actually living on campus most times is required as a freshman at most bigger schools. Some schools out where you can commute in, or they have off-campus housing, or they just allow their student athletes to live off campus because it's more flexible, and they abide by that as a rule. They don't have room and board tuitions, or they don't make mandatory room and board. But typically you're looking at, in big cities like New York and San Francisco and LA and places like that, usually room and board is, almost upwards of $12,000 to $15,000. And, I think you kind of get what you pay for there. So, just think about, when we talk about full grant in aid, that's a term that college coaches use a lot, full grant in aid, that's everything included. But when you're just talking about tuition, you're just talking about the cost of actually attending class. So there's a lot of other costs that you do need to consider, like room and board and books, and just other expenses like food and off-campus meals, and all the things that you'll need to buy for your dorm room, and the things you'll need to survive, things like that. Okay, and then this on the bottom here, this is just a typical breakdown. It's very common that if let's say a school's fully funded with 4.5 scholarships, that's the most that a school can have on the men's side. The girls have 6 because of what's called Title IX. Title IX just means that the women's sports have to be equivalent in scholarship to the men's sports at that particular school. So on the men's side, we have less scholarships than the women do, but you can see that typically you're going to have 5 or 6 players. 5 or 6 players here that are on 50% scholarship or more. If you're later to the game, or if you're kind of on the outside looking in, you're probably going to be on 40% scholarship or less. But as we know, scholarships are one-year deals, and this changes year to year. Jamie also mentioned their academic scholarships are more prevalent. Obviously, not everyone's a student athlete, so there's going to be more academic scholarships. But look at the difference here. $13 billion of academic scholarships are awarded each year. There's only $3 billion in athletics.
That one blew my mind.
Those numbers would be, if you did it just for student athletes, I think those numbers would be probably a little bit more top heavy on the athletic side, but just showing you all the academic money out there. Even if you go to a school that's costs $50,000, if you have really good grades and you can get $20,000, $25,000 academically, it cuts down on that cost. And if you play well, there's an opportunity to get scholarship, and you have that verbal agreement with the coach before you go in for the next year. I think it's really good to know that, in a lot of cases you might not be paying as much as you think at a school like that. All right, we won't talk about the types of aid. That's pretty complex. Let's talk about recruiting. So these are the 5 stages, as I like to call them. We need to prepare, then we need to communicate well, and then we can start to think about going on visits. And then the 4th step would be verbally committing to the program. And the 5th step is actually signing the national letter of intent. So verbal commitments can happen anytime after that year 11 summer, June 15th, after year 11 summer. Signings can only happen during year 13 or later. And each year it happens the 2nd week of November. That's the first time someone can sign. So for example, someone that's verbally committed in the class of 2023, so they're graduating this May, they might already be verbally committed, but they won't make it official. They won't sign the national letter of intent, which is binding between the player and the school, not the player and the coach, but the player and the school. They won't sign that until the 2nd week of November, in just a couple months' time here. I think that's important to note. So let's talk about those phases. And then, of course, the 6th phase of actually going to college. I love to check back in just saw Toby the other day. He came to my stomping grounds here at TPC, but it was great to see him and just hug him and ask him, hey, how are things going? How are your classes? How are you adjusting? How are you sleeping? That was really one of the main questions I wanted to ask him, is like, how are you sleeping? How are things? And it sounds funny, but it's a big adjustment. It's a big adjustment for, someone going 20 miles down the road, and it's an even bigger adjustment for someone like Toby, coming across the world and being pretty far from his parents. Let's just quickly talk about, I know my 15 minutes is probably dwindling here. Let's talk about the big.
You got 3 minutes.
Okay. I got 3 minutes. I'm going to talk about the big three things that we need when it comes to assembling your marketing portfolio. So when it comes, and I just want to kind of preface this with, you have one chance to make a first impression. We don't get a second chance at making that first impression. So if we send improper communications, or if we're informal with what we're doing, a coach is probably going to write you off right away. Another point I want to make: coaches at Duke, at Florida, at Stanford, at Cal, at Texas, and I'm not exaggerating, they get hundreds of emails a month. If your email says, I love golf, this is why you should take me, I love Texas, you're blending in and you're looking just like everyone else. You have to work on standing out, be different. As I say, shake up the status quo. Because think about that. If you're the coach and you have 100 emails came in last week and all of them look exactly the same, they look identical. As a coach, how are you going to separate them? So a lot of times, just quickly here, what we talk about with our students at ForeCollegeGolf is they know your scores. They can look them up online in most cases. They know your grades because you're going to be sending a nice formal updated resume. And they also know that your swing video is attached because you're going to either put a signature link in your Gmail or you're going to attach it to your resume with a clickable link. So it's fine. There's nothing wrong with sending that information, but make sure that you're putting something in there like a personal story or what you're working on in practice or something that really differentiates you as a person to stand out. One thing I have my players do in this introduction letter is I have them define a past tense struggle, not present tense, but past tense struggle. And then they define how they overcame that struggle and show the present tense success. Right? I think that's a really big one. But make sure that you assemble this the right way and you have the right materials before you just start reaching out, especially to the wrong schools. You want to make sure that you're sending to the proper schools as well. And not just the dream schools, but also your target schools and your safety schools. And let's talk about that. Reach, target, and safety. So notice I didn't call dream schools reach schools. A lot of times dream schools are the 1, 2, or 3 schools that you know pretty well that you can't play at right now, but you still want to keep them updated. I'm a big believer of sending to those too, but let's talk about more practically how we actually form a database and a school list. After we figure out college preferences, after we talk about finances and what we can afford, then we go in and we talk about, okay, where do I fit? And we typically compile a list of anywhere, depending on the player, where they are in the process, anywhere from 20 to 40 schools. I like it towards the 20 mark. The smaller we can make that list and the more concise we can prove our efforts to be, I think the quicker that the process can go. And that's usually a good thing because we're always on a timeline in this process. All right, and then there's one more thing, one more stat I want to give you guys, and one more idea that I want to leave you with before we go here. And not only filling out team questionnaires, not only following them on Instagram, that's another thing I can add to this, and engaging with them on Instagram. I think that's a really easy way. Filling out the questionnaire and following them on Instagram, 2 great easy ways where you guys, even across the world, can start to engage with these programs. Like their information, shoot them a quick DM, ask them what they're up to in practice that week, or ask them how the event went. A lot of times those assistant coaches are running those and they will get back to you. So I've seen a lot of recruiting happen on Instagram. It's quite surprising. I'm writing an article about it right now. But last thing here, emails and phone calls. Are emails necessary? Yes. Will emails get you recruited? Absolutely not. Emails don't help develop the relationship. Emails don't push the process forward. I've never really seen someone get a scholarship just by email. Okay. So, and really what that looks like is we have to be strategic throughout the process and send emails, make phone calls at the right time. And that's strictly player dependent and process dependent. So I can't give you guys too much general information about what that strategy would be for you unless I knew your specific situation. But generally speaking, this is something really good to remember. Emails are for providing the information. Okay, we're gonna ask a question. Typically, we're gonna try to gather some information over email, but for the most part, emails are providing information on you. Do that a lot and do that very occasionally with updates. Regular updates. Usually, if you're in the middle of the process, every 2 weeks is a good general rule of thumb. And then phone calls. A lot of people think phone calls are just for selling yourself. And yes, there's a first impression component to this. Coaches want to get to know you as a young man. They want great people on their team. They want to be involved with great families as well. So they want to, in a sense, they're recruiting your entire family, your parents, and even sometimes your siblings, because they want to know where you're coming from and your background. But when it comes to phone calls, I think not only putting yourself out there, but asking great questions, right? Not asking how big's the team, because we can find that online. We can Google that in less than 20 seconds and figure that out. Not asking where are you guys playing. We can also find their schedule. And not asking anything really about the coach, because you can read the coach bio. So there's a big preparation component that goes into this, but really what phone calls should be for is asking good questions and gathering that information from the coach. Gathering that information so you know whether you're going to go after that school even harder, whether you're going to ask the coach for a potential visit, and whether that school is really the right fit for you. Okay. All right, guys. How'd I do?
Hey, well done.
Just a couple minutes over.
Only 36 minutes. That was gold. That's good for you. We'll take that as a win.
Beautiful.
Superb, Mike. Thanks. I think some really good information as always from you there. We've got a couple of questions here. We'll do those first and then maybe sort of see if any more pop up as we go. Sure. Stuart's asked, for someone with dual US and British passport, better to be treated as an international student or rather than a US student? Which one?
Yeah, so in most cases, it depends on the state here. So when we're talking about in-state or out-of-state tuition, right? I think that's the basis of this question. Am I right? It depends on the state, and a lot of times, if you're an international, a lot of times you will be an out-of-state player, and you'll have to pay out-of-state tuition, perhaps. At private schools, which I just want to point this out, about 30 or 40% of schools are private institutions. And it doesn't matter if you live 1 mile down the road or all the way across the world in New Zealand or Dubai or anywhere, you're going to be paying the same for in-state versus out-of-state. So in-state, out-of-state only makes a difference at public schools. The one caveat that I have, this is a bit of a secret and quite interesting. In Florida, where I live, and especially the schools here, we found that, like I mentioned earlier, there's linkage scholarships. They call it the linkage scholarship at UCF, which helps them get in-state tuition. And there's also a law here in Florida that if you own property for more than 2 years, then you can also apply for in-state tuition. So what some parents I've worked with have done is they've bought a small apartment. I had one parent buy a small apartment in the area where they knew their son was going during COVID. And they didn't reside there. They came over like 2 weeks a year, but they had residency in the state. And by his second year of college, he will be getting in-state tuition, and it's gonna save them about $15,000 a year. So it was a way. Obviously, he's paying for the mortgage, he's paying for the apartment, but it was a really smart way to offset the cost of in-state versus out-of-state. But to answer the question, generally speaking, you're going to be paying out-of-state tuition, and at private schools, it's the same. So it really doesn't matter.
Cool. Thank you. And Vivek's asked, what is the right age and grade for students to start communicating with coaches?
Good question. I think it depends on your level. If you're an elite player, that grade 10 or year 11 summer, you probably need to be sending emails 3 to 4 months prior to then. Right? Because they're going to jump on you, and they might even offer you a scholarship as soon as June 15th comes that summer. And I'll just use Toby as a guinea pig here for a second. Like Toby took a call on the night of June 14th over here, which was June 15th over there. They were calling him that night, weren't they, Jamie?
Yeah, I remember that.
Toby was obviously one of the best players in the UAE, and one of the best players in the region, and a great young man too, with great grades. So, he was a high priority recruit, and we started about a year and a half before then, just doing some other things as well. But we had quite a few communications up to about 6 months before that grade 10 or year 11 summer. But if you're someone that's, averaging 76, 77, 78 or higher, you typically don't need to start that process until sometime during grade 11 or year 12, I would say, generally speaking. But it depends on what you're looking for, depends on your grades, it depends on a lot of factors.
And are you judging that by sort of their stock then? So say a player thinks he's going to make a massive change up and an improvement in a year. Does he hang fire to sort of then present himself as a different proposition than go early, or do you go early and then show that improvement and sort of re-register yourself?
That answer there, Mike, was just strictly based on when these colleges recruit. So a lot of those, it's kind of like a domino effect. A lot of these top teams recruit first. They secure their top 2 guys. They might take 4 guys, but they're only going to secure the top 2 first. They're going to gobble those guys up right away within the first couple months after that June 15th date. I can't stress that June 15th date enough. That's really when recruiting starts for college coaches. We can send information, we can fill out questionnaires, we can call them at any time. There's no restrictions on us, 0. But they can't initiate contact, and they can't extend a verbal commitment or a scholarship until after that June 15th date.
It might be worthwhile giving an example there. So like, to make that a bit clearer for everybody, if you think of like parents and students in one boat, and then me and Mike in another. So me and Mike, with say, use Toby as example since you've used him already, we were able to contact coaches for 2 years in advance, and we pretty much we were constantly in talk with them. And we could tell him what we were speaking about, we could talk to the coach, we could be a middleman. But at no point could either his parents or him communicate directly with the coach. And if they happened to be at an event or something, they'd be able to say hi, and they would literally have to walk the other way. So yeah, you have to be very, very careful of that rule, because I think it can be taken the wrong way sometimes. But essentially, a middleman can, whether that be coach or somebody like Mike who helps with the recruiting process, can speak to coaches from any point onwards. But until that June 15th date, the students and parents cannot make direct contact.
Yep,
well said.
Just below that as well, can you share the presentation letter? Will they guys be getting any of this content, Mike? Can we share some of this on with them?
Sure. Yeah, I can send it to you guys. No problem.
We'll send the presentation on to everyone that's in there.
Yeah.
Cool. Yashri's asked, does it help if you have already been on a golf scholarship at your school and on the A team for 3 years? And then says underneath, it seems to me that shooting 70 to 71 is not that low from what we've heard of most UAE kids headed for golf team scores. Is this consistent competition scoring you're referring to?
Let me break that last part of the question. I'll answer the first one, and then I'll break down the second question. Does it help if you've been on golf scholarship? Absolutely. I think that's something that, being a part of a team, being a part of a environment where you're challenging yourself against other individuals on a daily basis is exactly what we do here in college golf. That's one reason why I think it's so attractive to most people. Is it's a lot of fun to come over here and paddle with the guys. And the memories that I have from playing college golf in Virginia at James Madison at the D1 level, just the bus rides with the guys, and the Wednesday nights where we hung out and went and played basketball, and like just getting to know each other, becoming a family. Those are all things that happen in college golf. So if you can express that from what you're doing now, and you've played on the A team for 3 years, and you're able to tell that story well and compare it to college golf, I think that could mean a lot for a particular coach.
I think that links back to your information then on the letter and how they present themselves with that first contact, right, Mike?
Yeah, and that might not even be in the first contact. It's totally fine if you want to make that a part, but I think telling your story over the phone is important too, and how you work with a team, what that's like in the UAE. Coaches don't know a lot about what's going on over there, and where you guys are at. So if you can explain that to them, even the EGF events, some of the other events that you guys play over there. Just having that information and communicating that properly to a coach can go a long, long way. Shooting 70 to 71 is not that low. From what we've heard from most UAE kids heading for golf teams. Well, I think if you're shooting 70, a couple rounds under par, that's really good, but you might be averaging 74.5.
Yeah.
If you're
I think
averaging
I think
70, that's really good average. I mean, if you're averaging 70, that means you're shooting half your rounds probably under 70, right?
Like, bear in mind, there's only been two kids that have averaged below 71 in the last 2 years. And that was Josh, in the last 3 years, that was Josh and Toby. And they've gone top D1 college.
That's really interesting. And I would also add to that, when you get to college, not only are the courses harder, but anybody that averages, I think the stats under 70.5 or 71 even is an All-American. And by the way, in Division I, there's only 40 All-Americans. So at the college golf level, and it's me saying that makes it sound like there's no good players over here. And guys, I mean, just this last week, we saw Ben James from Massachusetts shot 23 under and only won by 2. There was 55 guys under par at this event. There was 46 guys under par at another event for 3 days, 3 rounds on a 7,300-yard golf course. So 71 doesn't seem impressive, but when you average that under the stress of school, pressure and competition, and just being a freshman, there was a freshman at a school called LaSalle, Division I, quite unknown, but Division I. He was a walk-on last year. He shot 61 in his first event ever as a freshman just 2 weeks ago. So I think we just have to be honest with where we are and what those actual averages and numbers are. And it's not, I flash a lot of numbers in front of you guys and I talk about averages, but I think when it comes down to it, it's not about the average. It's about what can you do? Can you shoot rounds under par? Can you go low on a regular basis? And obviously a Division I coach doesn't want to see scores in the 80s or even the high 70s perhaps, but I think they're more inclined to be inquisitive and be curious about what you can do and what your good golf is like, not what your bad golf is or what you can't do, if that makes sense.
I think it's important to clarify there as well. That's not coming from general play rounds. These are tournament scores, and a lot of the elite juniors in this region will be going back to Europe, to UK, to wherever they're from, and playing in these big junior events. So that's where they're looking for the scoring averages, isn't it? They're looking for in events that are applicable and comparable. Yeah,
for sure. And those EGF events certainly hold weight, and there's some good competition, especially on the top where you guys are at. But Mike, if a coach sees that you're traveling, that you're testing your game and on different golf courses in different regions of the world, they're just going to be much more confident about not only getting on the first phone conversation perhaps, but actually recruiting you seriously.
Yeah. Cool. And John's asked, is there a database of the coaches that can be approached, or do we need to find that information ourselves?
Good question. I have a database. I don't typically give it or sell it. If you want to email me, I'm happy to, and you have a specific set of schools, I can probably just filter and give you that set of schools. The only other option that I know is out there, it's called, you can either go to collegegolf.com or just type in Ping, like Ping, the club company, College Golf Guide into Google. And you'll find, I think it's like $99 a year. And you actually have an interactive, so it tells you what grades you need, what SAT you need, and also how your scores on your courses based on the score, course rating and the slope, how you're matching up against those college golfers on college golf courses. But the academics are a bit Americanized. I don't know if that would work for you guys. So feel free to email me if you have any questions on that or want to see the database in another way.
Amazing. Thanks, Mike. That's all the questions I have here. Does anyone
That's a good question. That's a good question, because I think in order to make that initial list, I think what John was asking there is, I want to make an initial list. I want to see what schools are out there. It's really hard to find. That's one thing I've seen. And you can go one by one and research these schools, but as I showed there a little bit earlier, there's over 1,000, or I think it's 1,100 programs that just offer men's college golf. mean, that would take a long time. And really what I have is I have a database from the last 8 years of work that I've done. And I've compiled every single team, their rankings, and changed the coaches as they come in and leave as well. It's a lot of work, but it's part of the job.
Yeah, I think that's quite daunting though, isn't it? It's thinking the start of it. If you're really early in that journey, what colleges, what sort of, like Jamie alluded to, the campus, the town, the city. Do you know where? Narrowing that list is probably the first start, right?
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes if you're early
Right,
enough, sometimes. Sorry, Jamie, just to point this out real quick. Sometimes it's just general research that helps. Even if you're not going to University of Florida or University of Texas, if you're 12, 13, 14 years old, go ahead and research them. See what they're like. And then you can always back it up from there. Information is really at your fingertips.
Yeah, the one thing that I found, like that list effectively, I won't say it's useless without having someone to guide you through it. But I would say it's not far off useless, because if you try and narrow that list down without some guide as to what you're looking for, which is probably the best, it's the one thing that finding the right university is really important. It's narrowing down the windows of, like I say, it's things as simple as weather, size of college, even down to like subjects that college specializes in. Like, it's such a beast of a list that even with the power of having all the coaches, you still have no clue what each college is like. And like the job of trying to figure that out is just so ginormous. I genuinely can't put across how big. That's what scared me. It was trying to recommend colleges for kids to go to when I had absolutely no idea. Like, you try and find out, information on, Little Rock and all these places that, like, I barely know where they are on a map, let alone like what the school is like or what the history of the school is like. And you can have some real, I've seen some of my friends go to colleges that on paper look great, and they didn't realize that it's 3 flights and they're 4 hours away from the nearest airport and they're an hour away from the nearest town, and they just think life is going to be great playing D1 golf when they're in the middle of nowhere and they're bored senseless. So, like I said, the list is great, but without having an interpreter, it's not much use.
Yeah, and John's just backed that up with the question, with the statement there that he's asking for the perspective of someone that's not been to the States, and it's a daunting prospect. And I think that's very much the case, isn't it? And I think that's sometimes when talking to a recruiter like Mike or someone that helps with the recruiting process and helps people with their journey can at least narrow that down by asking some of the open questions that you probably weren't asking yourself, and all of a sudden your list might become a little bit narrower and your search can become a little bit less daunting, I think, in that aspect anyway.
Yeah, let me give you guys 2 really easy and effective research ideas here. You can just type into Google NCAA directory map, and it'll come up with the same maps I took a screenshot of and put in front of you guys are online, and you can hover over those. You remember the scatter plot maps that I showed, guys? You can hover over those schools and actually see what the name of the school is, what division they're in, and then learn more about them. So that helps geographically. And then when it comes to actually understanding the numbers and the school and the social side of things, which I think is very important, I love niche or niche.com, NICHE.com. That's just a general search engine for college. Or you can use, there's another one called CAPEX, CAPPEX. I'll add both of those to the chat if anybody didn't hear me there. Niche.com, CAPEX.com. Those are 2 great search engines.
Could you put the ping link there as well, Mike? The ping one you talked about with the
Yep.
Let's put that in for the guys as well.
Yeah, and the ping is good, but if you're looking for applicable information of where you fall when it comes to academics, I think it's a little bit Americanized, but it great information. You have all the coaches' names, all the schools there. That's where I pull my information from, to my master database. So really good stuff there.
Amazing.
Anything else
from you, Michael, from you, Jamie? I don't see any more questions there, so that's fantastic.
Well, I could go forever.
Oh yeah. I think that's great. It's a good starting point for everybody, and we can always do a follow-up one in a month or two if there is enough feedback for one. And like I say, I think it's just
Yeah.
an introduction. Some parents on the line have kids that are 20, 26, 7 and 8 recruits. So, it's just more to get an idea and get your head wrapped around it. If it is something that you potentially think might happen in the future, it's worthwhile just investigating early and just kind of having an idea just in case it does happen. So, like I say, my recommendation would always be to find people who are better at it. It's a huge topic, and it's one that Mike's helped me understand a lot over the last few years.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Guys. That was some excellent information.
Looking forward to doing it again, and we can dive in deeper to the strategy of the recruiting process next time, perhaps, or start to show some of those other options at the Division II, Division III, or even some of the lower levels like NAIA or junior college level as well. Because I think that's the biggest thing that I wanted to come on here and say today is there's great options wherever you look. Now, if you have, like Jamie said, you don't want to take 3 flights to the middle of nowhere necessarily, but there's ways to weed those out and to simply eliminate those just from going through the process. So maybe that's something we could touch on in a meeting, our next meeting here.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Looking forward to seeing y'all soon, and feel free to email if there's any questions. Happy to answer anything.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate your time. That was awesome.
Thanks, Mike. Great to see you.
See you soon.
Talk to you soon. Okay.